Okay, hi folks. Let's talk about chapter 3. Here is a nice little couple of slides I've got prepared. What we're talking about is global business. Again, we're looking at things from the outside in the early chapters, where we're looking at how the world operates on a business, from a business standpoint, how international trade happens, how investment happens. One of the main theories behind global trade is what's happened is barriers have come down over the past 10 or 20 years. 20, 30 years ago, you had a lot of duty and import on restrictions on all kinds of products, and you couldn't bring this to that country and everything like that. But globalization has been moved quickly along from barriers dropping. So there's all kinds of ways that we have trade barriers. We put up trade barriers like in the current administration, and we drop trade barriers. Over the years, it's been dropping. Now we've got some more trade barriers. Two important theories to understand are comparative advantage and absolute advantage. And so study this in the book carefully. Comparative advantage is basically using less resources to produce something than somebody else. So if I were to paraphrase a simple example, for Japan to produce software, what do they have to give up? Not much. They're very efficient at it. They should trade because they're better at making that than others. Brazil, on the other hand, might be better at producing barley, or wheat and barley, something like that. They're more efficient at doing that, so they should export that kind of stuff. It takes them less hours to produce barley, and it takes Japanese less hours to produce software than others. So that's where the comparative advantage comes from. Absolute advantage is just being better at something, but the key to trade is comparative advantage, and that's an important theory to understand. The pros and cons of free trade. I think you guys all know that I'm kind of a pro on trade because that's part of how I've made my living, and it's perfectly legit and legal, and I'm getting employment out of it, so I don't know what the real problem is personally. But I do understand there are pros and cons, and I would point those out. There's a lot of business going on in the world, and prices have been brought down due to global trade. That's a pro. We're paying less for things because of global trade. If we produce things here, things would be a lot more expensive. So that's something that people don't necessarily appreciate, is buying cheap product. We have inexpensive consumer products here all the way. Trust me, it's cheap. It's because of global trade. It also inspires new products. The cons are, of course, low wage jobs leave. What it does is it makes way for higher wage jobs, but fewer of them. That's just how it goes. You know, the world every nation has had a progression of agricultural societies to industrial revolution manufacturing, production societies to service and white-collar societies. That is the progression that nations follow. Look at the Asian tigers, Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Singapore. They started off in labor, and then they started off in agriculture, then they moved to labor, then they moved to services, and now they're white-collar, handling services for the rest of the world and doing upper-end stuff. So there's a progression in global trade that is a favorable one. A couple of terms that are important for involvement of global trade, and that one of the big picture things is balance of trade, is how much exports and imports. Now something right here says that trade surplus being favorable when you export a lot. I don't 100% agree with that. I can see their point that favorable means that the United States is taking currency from another country. We're getting money. That's certainly favorable. We're moving our goods to other countries. So we're exporting. And when we have a lot of exports, we're taking in a lot of money from other countries. When we have a trade deficit, when we are importing a lot of things, so what's happening in importing over exporting is that we're sending more money outside the country. Money is leaving the country. Again, that's not as unfavorable as you think, because we're getting quality product for that money that we're sending. Also, in terms of GDP, it's less than 2%. this trade balance. It's very insignificant compared to the bigger economy. So when people tell you that this trade, deficit is so bad, I don't really understand why it's that bad. It isn't that bad because relative to our economy, it's tiny. It's a tiny thing. The balance of payments is the amount that's coming and going in and out of a country. Another concept in this chapter is how you would manufacture things overseas. And with this arrow here, you have a spectrum of least commitment, or let's say the easiest on the left side of this. You'd have the easiest or the most difficult, but the most difficult is more investment and more risk and more profit. So you're starting with licensing. It says here, you can produce this, I'll let you do that. Exporting, importing, that's the next step. Basically, there's just buying and selling. You can involve yourself in a franchise, so you set that up that way, or you can do contract manufacturing. Again, each of these add more commitment, more capital investment, and probably more profits. You can have a JV, international joint venture, which means, let's just say that you're going to buy part of the factory. You're going to buy all the equipment in the factory to make your stuff over in Mexico. You invest as a joint venture, and you have a strategic alliance where you've poured money in to help with equipment or buy the factory or something like that. And as we move towards the right side of the spectrum, the most involvement would be foreign direct investment, where you actually buy a factory. So this is my factory in the foreign country, and that's where you're getting a lot of profit from your production, obviously. Makes sense. So licensing and global popularity, yes, it is some of America's greatest exports are brands and movies and Disney and Pixar and Guardians of the Galaxy and things like that. So those are actual licenses that are very profitable. Of course, building a brand like that takes a lot. We'll talk about that in marketing later on, but building a brand takes a lot. And once you've built a brand that's an international brand, you are very valuable. It's worth a lot. Another buzzword to understand is FDI, foreign direct investment. There's a lot of money circulating throughout the world in business. An incredible amount of money, trillions really. Trillions of dollars are regularly being shifted from one country to another in terms of foreign direct investment. What does Honda do when they're trying to put a factory into Texas or Toyota or whoever? What are you going to do? You're going to buy a factory. You're going to buy a building. You're going to employ people, and you're investing 100% in this factory in another country. So that's foreign direct investment. It's like the car industry right now. It's one car has parts made from 100 different countries and 1,000 different factories. So it's hard to say that Toyota cars are all Japanese. They're not. That whole thing has gone away. We've changed our the way of looking at international trade that way, where computer parts come from 50 different places. So are they made in one place? Well, they may be assembled in one place, but are they really made somewhere? I have one story about how the Apple iPhone is made. It's only assembled in China, but the parts come from the United States, Korea, South Korea, Taiwan, some from China, some from the Philippines, some from Indonesia, some from the States. All kinds of parts are thrown together to make just a simple iPhone. So that's the world of international trade. And I'll conclude by saying that I believe firmly that the opportunities for the future are in international trade. Look at growth in nations. America's growth, Europe's growth runs about 2-3%. Asia's been running between 5 and 10% growth every year for a decade or two. Think about it. There's where growth and opportunity is in the international world. Maybe I'm biased, but there is growth going on in international world. Oh, sorry, I forgot a couple more slides here. Protectionism. These are tools that the government has to regulate the flow of trade. Tariffs are just taxes, paid percentage on top of something. Best way to explain that is in South Carolina, you want to protect the t-shirt industry. So if somebody makes a t-shirt from Mexico, let's add a duty of $1 to make it fair so that we can compete. That's all fine and dandy, and that's great. The United States government gets a tariff fee or a tax That's good. We're getting money for that import. And it evens out the score. So there's protective tariffs, and of course we're doing large tariffs. Tariffs, by the way, always get passed down to the consumer. That's the economic fact. That it doesn't hurt the country, it hurts the consumer that are buying. So that's why trade with tariffs with China aren't really being effective at all. The other ways to control trade would be quota, which is the number of goods, not a fee, but the number of goods. And then the embargo is more of a political tool used to say, these people are acting bad, let's not trade with them. Iran, South Korea. And we've got a lot of controversy on outsourcing. And what's happening right now is we're actually getting jobs moved back in insourcing. If you want to find the blame to who this is, it's the corporate profits. If you want to make money, you have to find cheap labor, period. So end of story. That's how it goes. If you're in the profit capitalistic world, you need to find places where labor is cheap, and that's what's going to happen. And outsourcing is not a couple of decades old. It's hundreds, if not thousands of years old. America was the outsource production center for Europe only 100 years ago. We were the slave labor. America was slave labor 120 years ago. New York City was the textile slave shop. So things have changed, and it's not so cut and dried. And anybody that says that they understand it very clearly, it's a complex world, this international puzzle of all the parts and all the pieces that go together. So that's it for chapter 3. Thank you very much.